What's going on, you guys? It's your boy Ben Mahari here, representing Mahari Nation Sports Podcast. Much love to the entire LDBC and the entire basketball community. Um, I'm going to have my show, Basketball Conversations, next Friday at 9 p.m. Central Time. I'm almost done, with my quarantine period. I'll be out of quarantine next Thursday, you guys. But I want to personally thank all the love and support that I've been getting out of here, guys. It's been really been appreciative, and I'm on the process of getting better. But make sure you guys stay safe out there. The pandemic's only going to get worse from here on in. But let's get down to business here, shall we? So, this one, I've been waiting to, do this video for a while. And it came from, the interview that Shay did on his podcast with Isiah Thomas, where Isiah said that Jordan wasn't his main competition during the 80s. Now, I wanted to, go out and just, spill my guts out, but I wanted to take some time to really listen in and really think about it. Now, the thing that I took from this whole, interview was that, when you look at Isiah Thomas, to me, he's what I call, in my perspective, a street slick talking politician. And when I say that phrase, I mean by is that he's the kind of guy that will throw in 80% of the truth when he talks to you, but then there's the other stuff, the 20% of it, where you hear some of the slickness coming out of his words, and it almost comes across as BS. And that's why I usually call Isiah Thomas the slick street talking politician. All right, that's how I kind of view of him. But let's get down to his words. Okay, so during the Club Shay episode that was basically broadcasted on Tuesday. All right, Thomas basically ranked 5 of the toughest players he ever played against, and he ranked Michael Jordan as number 5 behind Magic Johnson, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Larry Bird, and Julius Erving. And he pretty much told Shannon Sharpe, just head to head, I was dominant over him until 1991, when I basically had career-ending wrist surgery up until then. My record against him and his team wasn't really much competition there. Now, I get some of the sentiments that he's pretty much talking about. Okay, now listen. There's no denying the fact that during, let's say, the mid '80s, that when Michael came into the league, listen, he wasn't the main competition, even though he was a very talented player, but he was basically an up and coming player at that time, where pretty much Magic Johnson and Larry Bird pretty much were the dominant figures of the NBA at that period of time, and Isiah Thomas was pretty much climbing up the NBA ladder. Okay, um, but he ranked the teams. He also ranked the teams that he pretty much were pretty much the teams that they were tougher to face against, and obviously he named the Lakers and the Celtics, and then also mentioned the Philadelphia 76ers into the conversation too. Now, I will say this about the 76ers, okay? The 76ers were a really good team in the early 80s, all right? When you had Moses Malone, when you had Dr. J, when you had Andrew Toney, you know what I'm saying? You had Bobby Jones, and was it Mo Cheeks as well? They were really pretty much a dominant team that pretty much swept through everybody in that 83 postseason. But by 85, that team was pretty much, pretty much running towards this course, because by that time, Charles Barkley was a new draftee coming in. Okay, Andrew Toney's foot injuries were pretty much the end of his career. All right, Moses Malone was still a really good all-star quality player, but wasn't the dominant force that he once was. And obviously, Dr. J was coming up in age and retired a couple of the seasons later. All right, and obviously you had the Celtics and the Lakers that were pretty much the dominant teams at that period of time, when the Pistons were still the offensive juggernaut before they transitioned to that tough-minded defensive team that they were known for. Now, there is some context of why Isiah Thomas said what he said, okay? Because you got to remember, all right, Michael Jordan was born in Brooklyn, and I want to salute Too Raw for TV for pointing this out. Michael Jordan was born in Brooklyn and then grew up in North Carolina, all right? Isiah Thomas was born in Chicago, all right? He grew up in the rough streets on the west side of Chicago, all right? And also, Mark Aguirre was also his childhood friend at that time on the west side of Chicago. And each of them saw the worst of the worst in the streets of Chicago during the drug pandemic period, all right? And pretty much Isiah Thomas grew up in that environment and pretty much was one of Chicago's greatest athletes. All right. He won a state championship in St. Joseph's High School. All right. And it was, and also this has always been confirmed too. His friends in his family wanted Isiah Thomas to go to DePaul University. All right. And Isiah was very heavily interested in going to Indiana University. And people have heard stories about about Bob Knight and how racist he was and how verbally and physically abusive towards his players he was back then. But Isiah Thomas, went past through all that and committed to Indiana University. And though they bumped heads, all right, eventually those two guys, became a close knit relationship. And then Bob Knight pretty much confirmed to everyone that Isiah Thomas was his guy. And during that sophomore season for Isiah, Bob Knight reeled in some of the strictness of his motion offense and allowed Isiah Thomas to be the free, creative player that he is, and eventually won the 1981 NCAA championship over, ironically, North Carolina. Then the next year, North Carolina won the 82 championship day on a game-winning shot by Michael Jordan. So go figure there, right? But there is some context of why Isiah, said what he said. Okay, this has been a feud that's been stemming across for decades, right? Now remember, Bob Knight coached that '84 USA team, right? He pretty much said on the record that Michael Jordan was the best player that he had ever seen, and this was a guy that coached Isiah Thomas, all right, in Indiana to the '81 national championship. You got to believe that Isiah Thomas grew some sort of resentment over that. And you also have to consider the fact that when Michael Jordan was drafted by the Bulls, all right, and just a couple of weeks into his rookie year, he became the most popular athlete in all of Chicago. All right, virtually from day one, Jordan owned the city of Chicago, and Isiah Thomas, who grew up in Chicago, born and raised there, was one of the top villains in the town. Every time that Isiah Thomas, came to Chicago Stadium, he was booed all the time. You cannot tell me that played a major role into that. All right. And you have to also consider the fact that during Jordan's rookie year, there's been alleged evidence of this too, that Isiah Thomas and some of the veterans of both the Eastern Conference organized a freeze out to make Michael Jordan look bad because they felt that Michael Jordan was getting too much, spotlight and felt that he was getting too much unnecessary attention. And, Michael Jordan never forgot that. And so there's a lot of that, built-in seated, resentment between those two guys that was already embedded, before they eventually met each other during the postseason. All right. But I want to make something very, very clear here. Okay. About the myth of the bad boys. And I did a video about this, months back. All right. The thing about what the bad boys was is that, listen, as much as they want to keep playing this narrative that they basically were the team that could only shut down Michael Jordan, last time I checked, they didn't necessarily shut down Michael Jordan as they like to play that narrative. Okay. Now listen, we know that we know the fact that during the playoffs, the Pistons enlisted the Jordan rules. All right, to make Jordan pay anytime he goes into the paint and make him pass the ball to other guys because Michael Jordan just did not trust his teammates, right? But in the playoffs, series against the Detroit Pistons, all right, in 1988 when they first met each other and when the Pistons won it in 5 games, Michael was averaging 27 points per game. I don't really think that's necessarily shutting down a great player. If you say he only averaged 15 points a game in that series, then I would agree with that. But that's, to me, it doesn't ring true entirely. Then in the '89, conference finals, when the Bulls made that Cinderella run, courtesy from the great shot against Cleveland. All right, they were up 2-1, and Michael was averaging 29.7. All right. Then during that offseason, the Bulls management felt that Doug Collins, pretty much ran his course and did what he had to do to get this team to another level. And then they took the big gamble of firing Doug Collins and bringing in Phil Jackson. And during that 89-90 season, okay, they improved 155 regular season games, right? And Scottie Pippen became a first-time All-Star. But let's remember something, okay? In that 7-game series against Detroit, he averaged 32 points per game. All right. By that time, the Jordan rules were no longer working to a certain extent because Pippen was starting to step up and play into that second role as a sidekick to Jordan. All right. Now remember, the thing that people tend to forget is this: the big reason why Charles Oakley was traded was not just because they wanted Bill Cartwright. All right. They had Horace Grant, who was pretty much green and pretty much was provided more athleticism and provided better rebounding and also better defense and better schemes defensively than what Charles Oakley did. As much as they loved Charles Oakley, and that was Michael Jordan's main protector. All right. By that time, that team in 1990 was not ready yet to win a championship, and allegedly Scottie Pippen had the migraine headache, was ineffective. All right. While Jordan pretty much had to carry the offensive sword when he scored 38 points and lost in game 7. All right. By 1991, the Bulls came back with a vengeance when they won 61 regular season games. And they pretty much made short, quick work of the Pistons when Michael scored 29 points per game and while Pippen scored 22. All right. Now, listen, there's no denying to the fact that, that the Bulls were pretty much an up and coming team. But I want to give Isiah Thomas some credit on this point, okay? When the Pistons were up and coming in the Eastern Conference, the Bulls by that time were still an up and coming team, all right? They were a team that just not had reached their peak yet. In both playoff appearances for the Bulls in 86 and 87, Jordan put up unbelievable numbers against the Boston Celtics, and they still got swept, all right? While the Pistons, all right, when they basically were starting to get their pieces together with John Sally, Rick Mahorn, and also with Dennis Rodman, Adrian Dantley, there you go, and then you had Joe Dumars in the mix. You had James Edwards and Bill Laimbeer. That team won 52 regular season games and pushed the Celtics to 7 games. And if Isiah Thomas didn't make the boneheaded mistake of throwing the inbound pass to Larry Bird, they would have eliminated the Celtics in 87. But it didn't turn out to be the case. They lost in 7 games. But this kind of parallel is kind of like, in a sense, this kind of reminds me a lot of what I saw during the late 2000s when it came with LeBron James and his battles with the Boston Celtics. Because to me, it was almost an equivalence to what LeBron James had to go through against the Boston Celtics. All right. A lot of these LeBron turds that like to run around here and talking about how LeBron was this great player and all that stuff, which he is. But let's not forget this, okay? During the early 2010s, all right, the Boston Celtics used to give LeBron James and the Cavaliers the business. All right, yeah, when they met each other in the 2008 playoffs, LeBron James was putting up magnificent numbers against the Boston Celtics. But by that time, the Celtics were at their peak with their big three. All right, they were one of the best defensive, teams in the NBA that year. All right, and the thing about that is, even though LeBron James scored 45 points in that game 7, all right, let me check this out real quick. I just gotta check this out real quick. That series stat line. Okay, so in that series, Paul Pierce was averaging 19 points per game, and LeBron was averaging 26. So in a sense, you could say that LeBron outscored Paul Pierce in that series. But when it came down to that game 7, okay, LeBron scored 45, all right, and Paul Pierce scored 41. And remember, P.J. Brown was perfect in the fourth quarter. He made all 4 of his field goals, including that mid-range jumper with about a minute to go that pretty much sealed the game for the Boston Celtics. And LeBron, you got to look at this in this proper context. Paul Pierce is right when he talks about that the Cavaliers were not their main focus because they had the Lakers to deal with. They had the Pistons that were still a good team before they broke that team up, prematurely, right? The Magic were up and coming, all right? You had all these other teams that were pretty much giving the Celtics a run for their money, all right? And the Cavaliers, as good as they were up during that period of 2008 to 2010, were not the main focus of the Celtics. I agree with that, and I can see that in that proper context. Okay. Now, a lot of these LeBron fans are going to stream the comment section and they'll be like, oh, you're hating, man. LeBron's this great player. Why would you, disrespect and all that stuff? And I just mute them. Like, delete, delete, delete. Salute to the Phenom for that. But my point to you is that in their playoff careers, all right, and I had to basically look this up. During their rivalry between Paul Pierce and LeBron James, all right, LeBron James is 35 and 34 against Paul Pierce, including a 17 and 13 record in the postseason. All right. But we got to remember, Paul Pierce beat LeBron James 2 out of 3 years in both 2008 and 2010. And one could argue that in 2010, the Celtics were pretty much the main reason why LeBron James left Cleveland and headed to Miami. I mean, we cannot dismiss this, you guys. But I wanted to make that statement there to probably tie this into what I'm talking about when it came to Isiah Thomas and Michael Jordan. All right. Now listen, Michael Jordan, used to had great games against the Detroit Pistons, including in 1988 when he scored 59 points in a 2-point victory. I think it was on Easter weekend, right? In the Pontiac Silverdome, he had 59 points. All right. Michael used to tore up the Piston defense during the regular season. And in the playoffs, he was still getting his numbers. But at the same time, the Pistons pretty much said, okay, we're going to let Jordan have his numbers. All right. We're going to make his life difficult and rough him up while he's trying to get his numbers. Can he trust his teammates? And that was a challenge because that perception during that period of time was that a scoring champion couldn't lead his team to an NBA championship until Jordan ended that perception back when he won his first title in 1991. All right. But I could understand the sentiment of what Isiah was pretty much talking about when he was illustrating the fact that, hey, we were still trying to pursue championships against the Celtics and the Lakers at that time. The Bulls were not even on our radar yet. But the problem with those statements is that there was so much tension and resentment between those two guys that it really comes across as basically, pettiness coming out of Isiah Thomas. I'm sorry to say. All right. Even though he may have some good points about it, and I'm not disputing that at all. But the feud between him and Jordan still resents to this day. You guys clearly saw it in the documentary. All right. Jordan talked about how he still hates the Pistons. He still hates them. And some of that hate still resides to this day. Now, some people can pretty much say, like, oh, Jordan's being petty. He needs to let this go. I don't know, man. There are a lot of stuff that you probably don't know about that I don't know about that pretty much give Jordan the right to hold some of this resentment on. And the weak thing was by Isiah was that he came across and pretty much said that I didn't know how much Jordan resented me and the Pistons. Like, come on, Isiah. You knew why Jordan resented you all these years. It's not hard to figure out why. Okay? And considering the fact that you refused to shake hands after you got swept in the playoffs in 1991, really left a really bad taste in people's mouths when it came to the Bad Boy Pistons, because the Bad Boys Pistons really played a rough style of basketball that was not well received by fans. But at the same time, it got them to those 2 championships. And every championship is always going to be valid regardless of anyone else says. All right. But I got to remind people this. If Magic Johnson didn't injure his hamstring in Game 2, and if Byron Scott didn't tore his hamstring in the days off before the 89 finals, there's a good argument that could be made that the Lakers could have probably won their 3rd straight championship, right? But unfortunately, you can't rewind. You can't turn back the clock. Both of those guys got hurt. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was pretty much at the end of his career, and James Worthy had to carry a lot of the load that was pretty much too great for him as well, despite the fact that he put monster numbers against the Pistons. But the thing is that the Pistons were pretty much at their peak. And the thing that I really don't understand of what people keep saying about, oh, Isiah used to dominate Jordan. Isiah was greater than Jordan. Like, really? Did you guys really forget the fact? Do you guys know that Isiah Thomas after 1987 didn't even finish top 10 in MVP voting, all right? It's one thing to say that he didn't finish in the top 3 or top 5, but he wasn't even in the top 10. Think about that, all right? By that period of time, you could pretty much say that, that the Pistons were pretty much a complete team after that point, and you could say that Joe Dumars was pretty much their best player at that time because he still holds records to this day in Piston history for pointers made and percentage, right? Now listen, there's no denying that Isiah Thomas was the captain of that team and the heart and soul of that team. But you got to keep in mind that Piston team was pretty much loaded, all right? And they were at their peak at the right time and won their 2 championships, all right? And this whole perception that they got old, let's keep this in mind, one particular thing, okay? When the Pistons got swept by the Bulls in 1991, all right? Let's look at the age level of this team, okay? Because I laugh every time when they say that they got old. Like, really? Let's keep this in mind, all right? When you look at the age level of this team, Joe Dumars was 27. Isiah Thomas was 29. Dennis Rodman was 29, all right? Mark Aguirre was still 31 years of age. He was still at the peak of his athletic prowess, all right? The only aging veterans of that team at that time was Bill Laimbeer, who was 33, Vinnie Johnson was 34, James Edwards was 35, all right? John Sally was still 26 years old, okay? So I don't understand where this is coming from when they say, oh, the rest of the team was old. There were only 3 guys on that team that were pretty much in their mid-30s, all right? And if the Pistons would have found a way to retool that team after 1991, all right, and kept Isiah healthy, during the peak years, during the Renaissance years of his career, who knows? They may have continued to be a contender in the East. We don't know that. But I always laugh when I hear that kind of, talk. But listen, back to the whole Isiah and Jordan thing. Isn't it too obvious that, Isiah Thomas, keeps playing these narratives every single time because he still thinks that, the NBA was out to pretty much get him, or pretty much are trying to, push him to the side and diminish anything that he's ever done? Like, I really don't understand, why Isiah Thomas, keeps doing this. Like, bro, why Jordan feels the way he feels, all right? Isiah burned way too many bridges with a lot of the stars in the NBA, all right? It's one of the big reasons why he was left off of the 1992 Dream Team, all right? Now, to me, John Stockton does not belong in the Dream Team. Isiah Thomas belongs there all the way. But you have to understand, all right? Isiah Thomas burned way too many bridges with those star players. And keep this in mind. Chuck Daly was the coach of that team, all right? He was Isiah Thomas's coach throughout the majority of his career, all right? You don't think that Chuck Daly could have just talked to those star players and say, hey, I understand you don't like Isiah Thomas that much. I understand that, but he is a great player and he's done a lot for this league, all right? I think it would be in the best interest for you guys to try to, mend fences with Isiah Thomas for the Olympics and try to get this done. You don't think Chuck Daly was able to do that? All right? There's a reason why a lot of those players didn't want to play with Isiah Thomas. And it's not just about the whole Isiah Thomas and Jordan thing, because that's too much of the whole argument that people don't look at. I particularly look at the whole Isiah Thomas and Magic Johnson thing as one of the big time reasons why he was left off of the Dream Team. All right? Remember, Isiah Thomas and Magic Johnson were friends for decades. All right? Magic Johnson was pretty much Isiah Thomas's mentor that pretty much showed him the ropes how to win a championship and had 2, unforgettable battles with each other in the NBA Finals in 88 and 89. All right? They were best friends. They were like blood brothers with one another. But the thing is that, listen, when all the stuff about with Magic Johnson and his HIV illness came and hit the fan, when Magic Johnson was hearing stuff that, Isiah Thomas was spreading around rumors about, Magic's sexuality and that nobody wanted to play with him because he was HIV positive. Like, come on, you guys. Don't you come to think that Magic Johnson had a lot to do with why Isiah Thomas was let off the team? I mean, come on, you guys. Y'all know this. All right? There's a good reason why Magic Johnson and Isiah Thomas didn't speak to each other for nearly 20 years until they finally met up with each other in 2019 on NBA TV. All right? That was a big factor why Isiah was left off of the Dream Team. All right? The Jordan thing was one of the big reasons. But that right there is a major reason for that. Listen, I got to give Magic Johnson credit on this. He's a bigger man than any of us. All right? Because if anyone tried to spread rumors about me and my sexuality, that's it. We're not talking to each other no more in life. All right? I give Magic Johnson a lot of credit for, being the bigger man, wanting to put this in the past, and basically, and the beef. I give him a lot of credit for that. But listen, this beef between Michael and Isiah has been pretty much stemming with each other for decades. And Isiah tried to, extend an olive branch to try to talk this out with Michael Jordan. But when you come out with these kind of statements and you're talking with a guy like a Shannon Sharpe that is pretty much the biggest LeBron, cheerleader in the media, I mean, come on. Why do you think Michael Jordan does not want anything to do with you or doesn't even want to have any type of relationship with you? All right, come on, bro. It's not that hard to really think about it. All right? Listen, Isiah Thomas, to me, is still either the third best point guard in the NBA behind, Magic Johnson and obviously Oscar Robertson. All right? But he was nowhere on the level of Michael Jordan. I mean, we need to stop thinking this way. All right? I mean, come on, you guys. It's not hard to put the pieces together on this. All right? Those two guys were pretty much rivals pretty much until their deathbed. And I don't see them ever, ending their long-term feud in the near future. Even I firmly believe that this will go on until Michael Jordan's deathbed. I really do. Because there's just too much resentment, there's too much jealousy, and there's too much envy in this relationship. Not for this to pretty much die in its tracks. All right? And when Isiah Thomas comes around and says those kind of ridiculous statements, considering the fact that he was working as a television commentator for NBC and pretty much told people that Michael Jordan was the greatest player of all time, all right? And then all of a sudden you come out across with these statements decades later. Like, come on, bro. You're not genuine at the things you're saying. Now, I could give him some points when he talks about that LeBron James is probably greater than Jordan because he's been able to play longer and achieve more. I get that. But when you say those kind of things and then you try to diminish your whole era of great athletes that defined the 80s and the 90s just to try to diminish what Michael Jordan accomplished, it comes across as hate. And I'm sorry. That's just how I see it. But tell me what you guys think in the comment section.